Hi ladies, this is Jen Calhoun. For our next MOPS craft, we're going to be making these home signs. And the O is actually interchangeable. So you'll have a different O for every season. Now, it might look a little bit intimidating, but if you listen very carefully to the directions and you make sure you take your time and use really thin coats, you will have a sign that looks just as beautiful as this. All right, for this craft, you'll see that we're going to set up different stations around the room. It doesn't matter whether you start with your letters like I'm going to show you now, or if you start with your shapes, you'll get around to everything. So I'll show you how we place the letters. Now, this might drive some people crazy because you want your lines to be really straight. Some people are going to care a little bit more than others. What we're going to do is use a ruler, and if you can make chalk lines about 1 ruler width away from all of your edges, that is just going to give you a little bit of a guideline that you can then wipe away when you're all done and everything's dry, so your letters will be a little bit straighter. See that? And I just already did all the sides. Then what I'm going to recommend is that you're going to place your stencils, the H up against the sideline, and then the E, and then you can kind of figure out where you want your M to go. You can use one of the shapes to kind of space it out a little bit. You might find too that you need to trim some of your shapes so that they all fit. You don't want to trim them too much because you're going to be using these as stencils and you don't want the paint to go on the wood. So if you need to, we'll have some scissors and you can give them a trim. Now, what you'll also notice as I show you how I place the stencils is that sometimes they are a little bit tricky and you might have to put them down more than once. Make sure you're really slow and careful too so you don't rip the stencil. Now, it's okay if you place it and then you decide that it's maybe not as straight as you would like it to be and you have to pick it up and put it down again. It's okay, but don't do it. Try not to do it too many times because you'll start to lose the stickiness. So I can actually see the lines as I'm placing this so that I can tell that the top and the bottom are straight. Now this might take you a while. Take your time. Make sure that it looks the way that you want it to look before you move on, because if you're unhappy with it, the way the stencil looks, you're not going to be happy with the paint. All right. So we'll stick it down. These are sticky. And try to take a little bit of time to really push the edges down. We're going to do something extra to seal the edges, but for now, we're just going to try to use our fingers. All right. So that's how you're going to place all 3 of them. All right. So the next step is going to be to seal these stencils. Now, it might look like I did this all really quickly, but I have been trying these stencils out time and time again, and it takes time. And you will get these bubbles. You can see them actually pretty well, I think, on this video, hopefully. You'll get these bubbles that kind of pop up even if you place these really well. You want to just try your best to seal them, because anywhere you have a bubble, the paint is going to bleed out. So after you've kind of done your best to seal it with your hands and maybe let it sit for a minute, let it bubble up again, because it will, and push it down again, we're going to seal it with a little bit of everybody's favorite Mod Podge. You only need the smallest amount. Please, please listen to this. A very small amount of Mod Podge. That's why we're not even using brushes. You're going to use your finger. And you're going to go and put the lightest coat of Mod Podge around the edges of your stencil. Now, these stencils are thin enough that I just kind of do the whole inside of the stencil. But the idea is that you're going to create this very thin coat of Mod Podge along all the edges to seal them to the wood. So take your time. It should be so thin that you don't see white. It doesn't look like white. It looks clear when you spread it out. So take your time. Every single edge should be covered in Mod Podge. And the layer is so thin that by the time you have gotten around to all of your letters, by the time you get to the E, let's say, if you started on the H should be pretty much dry by the time you get to the E. It's that thin of a coat. If you put it on too thick, then it can actually peel up the paint when you take off your stencil. So that is why I keep on emphasizing that this is a thin coat, just enough to seal the stencil. So we're going to go and do the same thing for the M and the E. All right, once you have all of your letters sealed, you're going to start painting them. So some things to remember is to take your time. If you get some paint on the wood, wipe it off as quickly as you can. That'll be the best way to get off the most paint. But really take your time, look out for the edges, and you won't really have a problem with that. Also, thin coats here. It doesn't really matter if you want to go side to side or up and down. I like doing it up and down. If you do have to kind of go side to side to get in a corner, just one last coat up and down to kind of keep all of the lines the same, but we will do a second coat which will help hide everything. That's going to be just the most important thing. Take it nice and slow, keep it in the lines, and keep the paint really thin coats. Once you've done all of your letters, we'll do a second coat, and I'll show you the very specific instructions about that next. All right, here you see we have all of the letters have one coat on them. So now we're going to do the second coat, and it's very important that you do this in the right order. We are going to do one letter at a time. You're going to do another thin coat on top of the first coat. The first coat does not have to be 100% dry. You could probably just stick around your table and chat for a few minutes, help somebody else out. In between coats, they don't have to be all the way dry. But when you're ready, you're going to do a second coat. Make it nice and thin again. The thicker the paint is, the more likely you're going to get it bleeding underneath. So that's why I keep on emphasizing it. Also, of course, there's going to be less messes on the table, less accidental dripping paint on your wood, that sort of thing. So, nice and thin second coat. And then, before you move on to the other letters, you're actually going to peel up the stencil. We want to peel it up while the paint is still wet. That way we don't peel up the letters with the paint. So you're going to have to be careful too after you've peeled it up to not bump into it while you're working on the next two letters. But here is the moment of truth. All right, and the lines are pretty straight. You could always kind of get your fingernail there if you see something that's not 100% perfect, but it's pretty good. All right, once you've gotten through your letters, you are home free. The rest of it is pretty easy. Now, there will be 5 stations, so make sure you stop at each of the stations to paint your shapes. I'm not going to show you how to paint all of the shapes. I think you can figure it out. You'll have one color for every shape. Make sure you're painting the right side of the shape. Obviously, the Michigan has a right and a wrong side. Some of the other ones have writing on the back, so you just have to make sure you're painting the right side of the shape. The edges are kind of a dark brown, so I would say that they look nice and finished without painting the edges, and that's a lot simpler and easier for you. The other thing you're going to need to do to finish your project is the Velcro dots. They are really easy to use. They are sticky. So you stick one on centered between your H and your M. Make sure you're using, alternate ones. And I used Scratchy on the home, but it doesn't really matter which way you want to do it. But you'll peel off the dot, stick them onto the back of your shape. You might even do it before you've painted them, and that way you don't have to worry about getting paint on your hands. Then after you've painted everything, you've put your dots on, you're just going to have to find a place to let everything sit and dry because your home sign is going to be tacky and wet for a while. You really don't want to smudge it. I'd recommend maybe even bringing in a little box, like a shoe box, to put your shapes in to carry them home in. That way you're not really worried about them making a mess if they're not 100% dry when you leave. But that is all the steps to it. So that's all there is to it. You can display this on a shelf. You could also get a little hook to put it on your wall, but you'll have a sign that you can display for every single season. Hope you enjoy!